the morning it happened, Cheryl Watkins had $23 in her checking account, a needle and thread in her coat pocket, exactly enough time before the number 14 arrived to do something that would change the rest of her life. She was 36 years old and had been sitting at the corner of Broad and Glenwood in Nashville, Tennessee, for 11 minutes, the way she sat there every Tuesday and Thursday, with her mending kit and her patients, and a reusable coffee cup that had gone cold. Her son Darius was 7. He needed new shoes. The electric bill was due on Friday. She had worked a double shift at the hospital laundry the day before, and her hands still ached from the mangles, the deep ache that lived in the joints and didn't leave until she slept, and sometimes not even then. The man sat down 2 seats away without looking at her. He was tall, wore a dark overcoat that had seen better days along the left shoulder seam, a clean split about 4 inches, the kind that happens when fabric meets age and a sudden movement at the wrong angle. He was reading something on his phone. He had the look of a man accustomed to being invisible in his own way. Cheryl recognized, because she had that same look herself. She watched the tear in his shoulder for about 30 seconds. She reached into her coat pocket. What the man did not know, what he could not have known, was who Cheryl Watkins was before the hospital laundry and the $23 and the cold coffee. He did not know about her mother's shop on Jefferson Avenue, or the 20 years of lessons that lived in her hands. He did not know that the needle she was threading in the November cold was not a stranger to quality fabric. He thanked her when it was done. He said it quietly, with what seemed like genuine surprise, and then the number 14 arrived and he boarded it and was gone before she thought to ask. 6 weeks later, Cheryl Watkins would understand exactly who had been sitting in that bus shelter. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The November light came in sideways in the mornings in that part of Nashville, cutting between the row houses on Delmar Avenue and landing in long strips across the linoleum floor of Cheryl's kitchen. She was up at 5:15 most days, not because she had to be, but because the apartment was quiet then. Before Darius woke, quiet was something she had learned to treat like a resource, something you saved and used carefully and did not waste. She made the coffee in a drip machine that was older than her son and poured it into the mug with the chip on the rim, the one she'd had so long she couldn't remember where it came from. She stood at the counter in her robe and her socks and looked at the list she kept on the refrigerator door under a magnet shaped like a sewing machine. It was not a to-do list exactly. It was a list of what needed doing versus what she could actually do, and the gap between those 2 columns had been widening for 2 years. Her mother, Evelyn Watkins, had run a tailoring and alterations shop on Jefferson Avenue for 31 years. Evelyn was 71 now, and her arthritis had forced her to close the shop 4 years ago. But the shop had never really closed in Cheryl's hands. She had learned to sew by sitting on a stool behind the counter from the age of 5, watching her mother's hands move through wool and silk and linen, with the same unhurried certainty that other people reserved for things that came easily to them. Evelyn had said many times that fabric told you what it needed if you were quiet enough to listen. She said the same thing about people, which was why she had always been good with both. Cheryl had inherited that quietness. She had also inherited the mending kit, a small zippered case in olive green canvas, containing 2 spools of neutral thread, set of hand needles graded by size, a pair of fine-pointed scissors, a thimble, a small square of beeswax for strengthening thread on heavy fabric. She carried it in her coat pocket the way some women carried lip balm. You never knew when it would be needed. The kit had been her mother's before it was hers, and before that it had belonged to Evelyn's own mother, a woman named Ruth who had sewed for church families in Clarksville for 40 years, without ever calling it a business, just a practice. The olive canvas had darkened over the decades from handling, which was not damage, it was record. She had met Marcus's father, Darius Sr., in the way young women sometimes meet the wrong man at the right moment. When she was 27, and full of a particular kind of hopefulness that she had since learned to moderate but not abandon, he had been charming and inconsistent in roughly equal measure. He was gone by the time their son was 2, not dramatically but gradually, the way water finds the lowest point and drains. He sent money occasionally and called on birthdays. And Darius Jr. seemed to have made a kind of peace with this that Cheryl found both admirable, quietly heartbreaking. She was doing it alone. That was simply the condition of her life, and she had stopped framing it as a problem to be solved, started framing it as a structure to be maintained. You kept the structure sound and the people inside it safe. You did not complain about the weight of the walls. The early signal had come 3 weeks before the morning at the bus stop, though she hadn't recognized it as a signal at the time. She had applied for a small business development grant through the city, a program for women-owned businesses in underserved zip codes. The application had asked her to describe her business concept. She had written about a tailoring studio, modest in scope, specializing in high-quality alterations and custom repairs for professional garments. She had submitted it on a Tuesday night after Darius was asleep, with the particular mixture of hope and preemptive resignation that had become her signature emotional register. She had not heard back. That morning at the bus stop, she had almost stayed home. Darius had a cough, and she had held his forehead in her palm for a full 30 seconds before deciding it was not a fever, just the dry air in the season. She had tucked him in with a glass of water, and the stuffed elephant he still slept with at 7, and had told him she'd be back by 3:30, which she would be. She was sitting on the cold plastic bench with her cold coffee when the man in the dark overcoat sat down 2 seats away, and she looked at the tear in his shoulder, and she reached into her pocket. It took her 4 minutes. She matched the thread to the wool by holding it to the morning light, which told her what she needed. She worked with small, even stitches, tight and invisible from the front, using the technique her mother had called a tailor's catch stitch, the one that held under stress without showing that it had ever been tested. The man had gone still while she worked, which she appreciated. Some people talked. The ones who stayed still understood something about concentration. When she snipped the thread and smoothed the seam flat with her thumb, you would not have known it had ever been open. He looked at it. He looked at her. He said quietly, "That's remarkable work. It's just a catch stitch," she said. "Not everyone knows how to do it." She shrugged in the way she shrugged at compliments, which was to say she received them and moved past them quickly, because there was always the bus to think about. He reached into his coat pocket and she shook her head before he got his wallet out. She said she didn't need anything for it. He put the wallet back. The number 14 came around the corner. He boarded it. She watched the bus pull away into the gray morning, and then she looked back down at her cold coffee and thought about Darius's shoes. She did not think about the man again for 2 weeks. It was her neighbor Claudette who first connected the pieces, as Claudette had a way of doing, being the kind of woman who read the local business section the way other people read their horoscopes, with faith that it was personally relevant. Claudette was 64, retired from the county clerk's office, and she arrived at Cheryl's door on a Wednesday evening with a tablet computer and an expression that said she had been sitting on something all day. She sat at the kitchen table and set the tablet down and said, "I need you to look at something and tell me if this is the man from the bus stop." Darius was at the table doing homework when Claudette arrived. Cheryl told him to take his reading to his room, which he did with the mild protest of a 7-year-old who had learned that mild protest was the ceiling of what was productive. After he was gone, the apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator's hum and the distant sound of a television in the unit above them. It was a profile in the Nashville Business Journal. There was a photograph. The man in the photograph was standing in front of a building on Commerce Street, wearing a charcoal suit jacket, no overcoat, and he was looking at the camera with the same contained, deliberate expression Cheryl remembered from the cold plastic bench. The article described him as the founder and chief executive of a commercial real estate development company called Mercer Capital Group. It described the company as one of the fastest-growing mid-market development firms in the Southeast. It described in a sidebar a philanthropic initiative the company had recently launched, a fund specifically designed to support small businesses owned by women of color in Davidson County. The fund was called the Evelyn Initiative. Cheryl read the name twice. She looked up at Claudette. "That's him," she said. Claudette folded her hands on the table with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who has done the thing she came to do. "I thought so," she said. Cheryl sat with the tablet in her hands and read the article from the beginning. The man's name was Nathaniel Mercer. He was 41 years old. He had grown up in Bordeaux on Nashville's north side, had put himself through Tennessee State on a combination of academic scholarships and late shifts at a warehouse distribution center. He had started Mercer Capital Group 9 years earlier with $40,000 in personal savings and a single commercial property in Madison. The fund, the Evelyn Initiative, had been named, the article said, for his mother, a seamstress who had died when he was 19 and who had, he said, taught him everything worth knowing about the value of skilled hands and patient work. Cheryl set the tablet down on the table. She pressed her palms flat against the wood. She was not a woman who believed in coincidence as a governing force in the universe. She was, however, a woman who believed in paying attention. She looked at the refrigerator door. She looked at the list. She looked at the gap between the two columns. Then she picked up her phone and called her mother. Evelyn Watkins answered on the second ring the way she always did, because she kept her phone on the table beside her chair and had never once in her life let it ring a third time. Cheryl told her about the bus stop. She told her about the tear and the stitch and the man who had said it was remarkable work. She told her about the article and the fund and the name of the fund. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What are you waiting for?" "I don't know how to reach him," Cheryl said. "You have an application in with the city," Evelyn said. "That application is public record. His fund works with the city, so you find out who administers the fund and you resubmit." She paused. "You put your best work on the table this time. Don't be modest. Modest doesn't feed Darius." Cheryl smiled despite herself. "Yes, ma'am." "Cheryl," Evelyn said, "don't mention the bus stop, not yet. Let the work speak first." "That's what I always told you." After she hung up, Cheryl sat for a while at the kitchen table in the quiet. She could hear Darius breathing in his sleep from the other room. Outside, the last of the November wind was moving through the gutter over the kitchen window. She opened her laptop and found the application portal for the Evelyn Initiative. She read the guidelines. She read them again. She pulled her original city application out of her email drafts, and she read that too. She saw immediately what her mother had already seen from 50 miles away, that she had written it small. She had written it the way she wrote her lists on the refrigerator, as an accounting of what was feasible, rather than a vision of what was possible. She stayed up until 1 in the morning rewriting it. She described her mother's shop. She described the 31 years and the Jefferson Avenue clientele, and the generations of Nashville women who had brought their complicated garments to Evelyn Watkins and left with something restored. The wedding dress remade after a daughter gained the weight the original seamstress had, failed to anticipate the heirloom blazer whose lining had surrendered to age, the difficult and expensive things that other shops sent away. She described what she wanted to build in specific terms: a studio in a commercial space of approximately 900 square feet, 2 part-time employees to start, a focus on professional and bridal alterations with an expansion into custom design by year 3. She included a financial projection she had built with the help of a spreadsheet template from the Small Business Administration website. She checked every number twice before she put it in, because her mother had always said that a person who could not account for her costs did not understand her business. She described her training, the decades of it, and she did not minimize it. She included on the last page 3 photographs of work she had done: a restored vintage wool coat, a hand-stitched bridle hem, a men's suit jacket whose shoulder seam she had closed with a catch stitch, so precise you would not have known it had ever been open. She submitted it at 12:52 in the morning, and then she went to bed. Preparation is the work. Everything else is just showing up. The call came on a Tuesday 3 weeks later. The woman on the phone introduced herself as Renata Hollis, program director for the Evelyn Initiative. She said Cheryl's application had been reviewed and that the selection committee would like to invite her to a finalist presentation. She gave a date. She gave an address on Commerce Street. Cheryl wrote it down. She thanked Renata Hollis. She hung up. She sat at the kitchen table for a moment, with her hand still on the phone. Then she went to Darius's room and sat on the edge of his bed and smoothed his hair back from his forehead, the way her mother had done for her, the way all the Watkins women did, going back further than any of them could trace. He was asleep. She sat there for a while anyway. Real preparation, her mother had always said, is just attention paid in advance. The finalist presentation was held on a Thursday afternoon in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building on Commerce Street. There were 6 other finalists. Cheryl arrived 12 minutes early in a coat she had tailored herself, a charcoal wool blend with clean lapels and deep pockets, and she sat in the waiting area and did not review her notes because she knew what she knew. Renata Hollis escorted her into the conference room at 2 o'clock. There were 4 people at the table. A woman to the left she did not know. A man to the right she did not know. Attorney at the far end whose name Cheryl would later learn was Patricia Chen. And at the center of the table, with his hands folded in front of him and his expression level, and contained Nathaniel Mercer. He recognized her before she fully sat down. She saw it move across his face, not surprise exactly, but a kind of quiet confirmation. The expression of a man whose suspicion has just become a fact, he said. "Mrs. Watkins." "Mr. Mercer," she said. Renata looked between them. "Do you 2 know each other?" "We've met," Nathaniel Mercer said. He looked at Cheryl carefully once. He paused. "I've been trying to figure out how to find you since November." Cheryl set her portfolio on the table. "I thought you'd want to see the work first," she said. Something shifted in his expression. He sat back slightly. "Your mother told you that?" "Yes, sir." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She taught me everything I know," Cheryl said, "including that a catch stitch only holds if the underlying fabric is worth saving." Nathaniel Mercer looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Renata. Then he looked at the panel. He said, "Let's hear the presentation." Cheryl Watkins presented for 22 minutes. She spoke without notes. She answered every question directly and without hedging. Patricia Chen asked about her projected timeline to profitability. She gave a number and explained how she had arrived at it. When the other panelist asked about her plans for the physical space, she described the building she had already identified on Jefferson Avenue. The E, 3 doors down from where her mother's shop had been, and explained what the renovation would require and what it would cost and what it would return. When it was over, Nathaniel Mercer thanked her. He did not tell her the outcome. She had not expected him to. She took the elevator down to the lobby. She walked out onto Commerce Street into the thin winter light. She bought a coffee from the cart on the corner and stood on the sidewalk and drank it and felt, for the first time in a long time, like a person standing on solid ground. 16 months later, on a Tuesday morning in early spring, Cheryl Watkins unlocked the front door of her shop on Jefferson Avenue. The sign above the door said Watkins Atelier in clean serif letters on a cream background, and in smaller letters below it, by appointment and walk-ins welcome. The renovation had taken 3 months. She had done some of the finish work herself, which had pleased her in a specific and irreplaceable way. The floors were refinished pine. The fitting room had a 3-panel mirror and warm overhead light and a small upholstered bench that her mother had reupholstered herself, a cognac velvet that Evelyn had selected by holding 3 swatches to the morning light until the right one told her what it was. Evelyn came in on Tuesdays and Fridays. She sat at the second work table with her arthritis gloves and worked on whatever was waiting and talked to the clients in the way she had always talked to them. The way that made them feel that their hem or their collar or their complicated zipper was the most important thing in the room. It was the most important thing in the room. It always had been. Cheryl had employees. One was a woman named Sasha, 23, who had learned to sew from a YouTube channel and had natural talent that was frankly embarrassing for someone who hadn't had 30 years of Evelyn Watkins looking over her shoulder. The other was a woman named Gwen, 39, a former theater costumer, who could work in any medium and whose hand finishing was the cleanest Cheryl had seen outside her mother's. The Evelyn Initiative had provided a $78,000 grant, which had covered the renovation, the equipment, the first 6 months of operating costs, the sign. It had also, through Patricia Chen's office, connected Cheryl with a small business attorney who had helped her structure the LLC and protect her intellectual property, which she had not known she had until someone told her she did. In her first operating year, the shop serviced 340 clients. By the end of the second year, she had a 4-week waitlist for bridal alterations, wholesale arrangement with 2 boutiques in Green Hills, and a workshop series she ran on Saturday mornings for women learning to sew, 12. Seats always full, a waiting list of its own. She heard about Nathaniel Mercer in the way you hear about a man whose work is visible in a city that knows his name through the business section, through clients who mentioned projects in their neighborhoods, through the general accumulation of reputation that adheres to a person doing consequential things. She knew, from Renata Hollis, the Evelyn Initiative had funded 14 businesses in its first operating year. She knew 3 of them personally. She did not know him, not exactly, not yet. They had spoken twice since the presentation, once when he had stopped into the shop on a Thursday afternoon with what turned out to be a genuine alteration need, a suit jacket whose shoulder seam had been improperly repaired by someone who did not know a catch stitch from a running stitch, and once at a small business reception in the spring where they had stood near the window and talked for an hour about Nashville and about their mothers and about the particular quality of patience that skilled work required and that most of the world had stopped asking people to develop. He was a careful man. She was a careful woman. They were both in no hurry, which was itself a kind of understanding. On a Tuesday morning in March, the light came through the windows of the shop on Jefferson Avenue the way her mother always said good light should. Come, sideways, honest, without flattery. Cheryl stood at the center work table with a cup of coffee that was still hot and a wool jacket belonging to a client that needed a shoulder seam closed, and she threaded her needle and held the thread to the light to match the color. She thought about the bench at Broad and Glenwood, and the cold morning, and the man who had sat 2 seats away and had not known where to look while she worked. Darius was in 3rd grade now. He had new shoes. The electric bill was current. Her mother was in the back room, talking to Gwen about the right way to press a lapel. Cheryl set the thread against the wool and began to stitch. She had built everything worth keeping. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.